If he was scared, he wasn't showing it. He was going to show all of them what he was made of. If nothing else, this'd be no easy win for Denis. He'd done it! He'd proved himself a worthy heir to his father's kingdom. Of a guard frog wasn't an easy kill, but it was a sweet one. Their leader, Alut, had never been bested in battle. He had a lance as lethal as it was legend. But he also had Bog brothers' clan were finally destroyed. Reggie knew they would not be the last. corpse of blocky Magu lay lifeless on the floor. He had croaked his last orders. The book wasn't just buried. The whole Grand Library was abandoned. Up buried in this revered place. More of his father's secrets. But for now, he had found the book. The other mysteries would have to wait. Buzzing, then the stench of rotten meat. The Mozi King had come for him. He wasn't the only king with a sting in his tail. With the king dead, hopefully the waves of Mozi infestations would slow down. The Mozi Queen, foul mother of the swarm. They've never stopped on Grubmother dead, that should be the last of them. For now. Frogs were dealt with, and Reggie had felt no rumbling monster. But sighting the Warchief had made Reggie realize they needed to prepare for an attack. The king was needed in the fort. The switch that gave electricity must be beyond this room. But they'd have to get past the Grubmother first. She was the one infesting the mines with her grublings. Great wings had finally stopped buzzing. She and her young would infest this place no longer. This strange device was a blaster. Molecraft more deadly than most bows. Reggie wondered what the smith would think. Blasters make short work of most enemies. The king could get used to this. This foe was called Mysterio by the crowd. He wondered what name the crowd would give him if he returned to the arena again. The fighter they called Macho Moli was a crowd favorite. Many a mole has lost their head to the brutal swing of his axe. Victory in the arena felt good. Maybe Reggie could learn to like this. Reggie didn't know what this creature was, but its teeth and claws were as sharp as they were fast. Reggie wondered what this feeling it inspired was. Fear? Despair? It was dead, and Reggie could barely believe he'd survived. He hoped this would be the last one he encountered. He died as he lived, finding ratfolk from the scourge of Frost Country. The guard captain had truly earned his place. Two side kings. The arena champion, Hulk Molgan, was a living legend of Moletown. His legend might have to live on without him. Arena champion, King Demolition. They cheered. One legend had died, but another had come to take its place. The Molberg shield was thick and heavy, crafted from the strongest plate metal. Getting past it would not be easy. Shields make for slow targets. Slow targets make easy gold. Double trouble means double gold. As Reggie cut the final combatant down, the crowd cheered his victory. Bloodthirsty though it was, he had grown fond of Moletown. This would be a true challenge, unleashing wave upon wave of foes on Reggie. He hoped he had the iron to go the distance. Exhausted, Reggie stood over his defeated foes. He had truly earned his status as a legend of Moletown. He wondered if he preferred glory to duty. Another of these fanged and clawed creatures. But if he could kill one Reggie reasoned, he could kill two. The Rangers were wrong. The creature was real, and nothing about its size was exaggerated. Sometimes a tall tale is worth hearing. Reggie had little trust in shamans. There was more mystery in this world than his father had taught him. The shaman had gone, but he'd left a key. The shaman had tried to hide in his workshop. The things he'd made and used on Reggie's kin were here. There was nowhere he could hide. The shaman's cruel experiments were over in a puff of foul green smoke. The Warchief's throne room could not be far. He was the one who started this, so it was with a sword in his skull that it must end. What was this evil twist on Molecraft? A grotesque monster of creaking gears and steam. The sight of it made Reggie freeze. But Jay's fury could not be held back. The sound of his small friend's body falling lifted the spell. Reggie didn't know what this thing was, only that it would die screaming. Beast, but his own brother in the evil machine. This was the frog's final insult, to turn his own blood into his unwitting enemy. But Denis knew where the Warchief was. Ashamed and angry at what he'd done, Denis ran ahead, wanting to spare Reggie this fight. No, Reggie wouldn't believe it. Everything the evil frogs had taken from him. His father, his friend, his kingdom. They wouldn't take his brother. And they wouldn't take him. Warchief was dead, and the kingdom saved. But what did it matter if his brother was gone? Folk rejoiced to have their king home. They had prepared for Reggie's coronation in the throne room. They had been sure he would return to them. To Reggie, it was a bittersweet victory. He had proved himself, but it came at a cost higher than gold. It was the start of a true golden age, free of the scourge of frog spawn. Working with the molefolk below, they built a new kingdom of steam and industry and wonder. But that is, as they say, a tale for another time. Put up a hearty challenge, but his grand hops were no match for Reggie's iron will. Sea-Rat put up a good fight, but Reggie thought the captain might be better off sticking to the ocean. Once again felt the bitterness of defeat at his younger brother's paws. Admitting defeat, Reggie knew he had passed the old rat's challenge. The young rat truly was the people's king. This half-rat, half-frog abomination must have been the work of his father. Reggie wondered whether this was the source of all the undead in the crypts. Another of King Radis's secrets, best kept hidden. Amy had taken refuge by an old statue and was getting some much-needed shut-eye. Reggie only meant to wake the bard, but his shout awoke the zombified remains of Mausamoto Muslashi. Mausamoto was a legendary swordmaster. Reggie hoped to get one more lesson before putting him to rest. Mausamoto when he was alive, but now his dual blades had fallen silent forever. Reggie directed Amy to the Crimson Keep, glad to have found her safe. As soon as Reggie set foot in the Hall of Books, he knew something was wrong. Something in the shadows, quieter than a mouse. It was Fang Boo, an infamous warlord known for his brutality with a halberd. Finally laid to rest, Chetty scooped up pages of the Book of Immortal Song. With a nod of thanks to Reggie, he scurried towards the surface. After all they'd been through, Reggie hoped the young bards gave a historic performance. Not a horde, but Crocus Khan. This fearsome Toad King rode his lizard steed into many a battle, but this was his last. Frogs can trace their lineage to the great Crocus, but this old toad would sire no more. With Crocus defeated, Johnny and Bertle thanked Reggie for his help. Reggie hoped in the future they would find safer and less pungent places to trade. his way through extinct monster guts was not how Reggie expected today to go. Still, the head of a legendary mudworm to adorn his royal bedchamber would be no small reward. Too late. The Pit King had returned from purpose and found Reggie inside. The Scrapper team thanked Reggie for saving their lives, but were even more grateful to have a fresh corpse to butcher. Reggie sighed. He was just glad there were no more grubs. The Stalker Queen and a fresh brood of eggs. This was a good reason to try. Together, Rat and Mole felled the Stalker Queen. Seb swore to get the tram working again single-pawed, in thanks for Reggie's help. Reggie was just happy to have made a new mole friend. Reggie's renown in the arena brought challengers from every corner of the known ratdom. From the cold rivers of the north came the brutal, filthy from down. Bite wasn't enough to stop King Demolition. Reggie wondered if he'd gained any fans among the beaver folk. Mohammed Moli made a name for himself with his swift feet and swifter paws. But Reggie could roll like a hedgehog and bounce like a bat. light-footed as any dancer of the Bolshevik ballet, but not nimble enough to overcome King Demolition. The Grubbuster armor was Molkind's ingenious defense against even the most vicious grub bites. Reggie wondered how it would stand up to his sword. The Grubbuster suit didn't stand a chance against King Demolition and his trusty sword. Reggie wondered if the moles would make him a Frogbuster suit. The Squirrel Elder's lifeless body lay on the floor, the priest at his side. Before Reggie could approach, he found out why they were trapped here. This was the nest of the Beetle Queen. Approached the still body of the Squirrel Elder. The Squirrel Elder rose with a yelp. He'd been entranced from the ritual smoking of extra potent bright moss. Unaware, he almost became the Beetle Queen's snack. Thanking Reggie for the rescue, they headed back to begin the festival. The shrine of the tapped root stood before him, but the root looked damaged. Before Reggie could wonder what had done this, he got his answer. A rootworm, bloated and enraged by bright sap. Had been banished from these parts for generations. Reggie had a feeling its presence meant something was rotten in the state of bright fur. To Reggie's dismay, the tap was broken. Reggie did not look forward to returning to the Squirrel Elder with no sacred sap and news of rootworms. The frog squatter was none other than General Hackett, no other than a common thief looting supplies. Taken today was his last blow. Seems he wasn't the only one here for vengeance. Shield Maiden Yellowtongue was waiting, screaming the name of her fallen brother, Warchief Greenhort. Was returned to peace. There was a shrine in the room, carved figures of Reggie and his enemies in Bright Fir Forest. The frogs had planned it all to lure him here. The squirrels at the Bright Fir rejoiced to hear Castle Dre was back to its somber state of peace once more. The Squirrel Elder could start the Leaf Fall Festival at last. Reggie basked in the joy of the squirrel folk, as warming as the golden light of the firs. He reclined in his chair and was honored with a cup of bright sap. Being king has its perks. This mother had left her young to fight alone. But the same could not be said of Lord Eivor as he leapt to his son's side. It was Lord Eivor's mighty blade that took her head, but the fight was won together. Arlo had found the reason his friends had fled. The taunting shrieks revealed that this was Baron Frostavik, son of the Darkwing who took his father, and therefore a perfect target for his revenge. His foe was beaten, but seeing what had been inflicted on Hilda and Krunk, Arlo's need for vengeance was only growing. understood now how one beast could feel like an army. He wondered if he would get a bonus for felling this giant as well. The giant death march was fast, but Arlo's trekking was faster, just in time, as it had already found a victim. The villager was grateful for the rescue. They had been collecting herbs at the ditch opposite the village when the death march attacked. It still had business there, it seemed. Death March had made its nest here. When the villager disturbed it, the giant creature chased them away in fear for their young. Already locked in battle with the Slither Scale. He would not survive long fighting alone. The young ranger was a fierce fighter, but no match for the Slither Scale. He barely thanked Arlo for helping him in this fight before he took off, seeking another. Could not leave him to fight alone. There was no stopping him until the Slither Scale was defeated. The Slither Scale's lair. They would end its tyranny here and now. The Slither Scale was defeated at last. The young ranger took no spoils, and with only a brief hoot of thanks, he was gone. Arlo hoped the ranger's thirst for revenge was finally sated. Too late. The nest was a writhing snare of Slither Scale. If any escaped, who knew how many would fall prey to them? Arlo would not let that happen. The blaze destroyed the last of the nest, but Arlo had no time to rest. The Slither Scale had returned. With the Slither Scale defeated, the forest settled into tranquility once more. More bottles lay outside the forge, which was otherwise as quiet as every other dead thing that haunted this place. The pile of bottles was large, even for one who drinks like a merman, and it seemed to be breathing. Arlo was amazed the merman could swing his hammer, let alone see who he was hitting. A couple of thumps on the head soon brought him to his senses. Something else came his way. Tumbling down the temple stair, Arlo was met with another horror. the head of the smith. It was Arlo now took up the battle cry. Tried not to think of how many friends, old and new, lay dead. He still had more to do. The beaver lay unmoving, another death on his conscience. The culprit stood before him. Arlo did not have his father to aid him. This time he would fight alone. Backstabber lay defeated, and Arlo paid his respects to the beaver, who leapt up at Arlo's paw. Playing dead had spared his life. As they came to the top of the ruins, they saw Little John. His smile at the sight of his father was the last he ever made. In a flash of bad teeth, his young life was ended. Robin's rage was terrible. He charged at the Darkwing, unleashing a hail of arrows. Together, they defeated the beast in a fury that sent all other bats from the ruin in terror. Arlo could hear the terrified squeaks of the villagers chained inside. Only the Darkwing General had the key, and she would not hand it over alive. Arlo needed no more reason to kill her.
leapt up on the eight-legged monstrosity as she ensnared another frog in her webs. Was thick and tough, but their blades soon cut them to ribbons. Short Tongue sent the terrified frog toward Bogmire Forge. Injured though she was, the queen had no intention of giving up her hunt. Her young hungered. Another villager freed. They too headed for Bogmire, and Arlo wondered how many more frogs it could take. A dank and unsettling place. It had to be the Queen's lair. Arlo wondered what his father would say if he could see him risking his life for frogs. The tail spinner queen was dead, and the frogs were soon at work rebuilding the village. The warden was sure mammalian-amphibian relations would be forever changed. No stealth claw, but an attack nonetheless. A band of warrior frogs harassing the village blacksmith. Their eyes lit up at the sight of Short Tongue. Only they called him by a name which we need not repeat here. Short Tongue and Arlo returned the insult, and with more than words. The blacksmith was glad to head to Bogmire in safety. Mole should have been silent in the blacksmith's wake, but Arlo was suddenly aware of a squelching of mud around them. The stealth claw was here. They had won this round, but they could not leave it at that. Frog and Rat agreed to hunt the stealth claw to its lair. These Night Eyes were transporting freshly butchered kills. The owl folk of the Golden Forest had forsworn meat generations ago. These were cultists headed to the feast. This much meat surely meant the whole cult would be at the banquet. the totem shrine, the scene was set for a bloody red banquet. If Arlo had any say, it would be their last meal. Defeated, the remaining cultists would return to the shadows. The Night Eyes circled the shrine. As Arlo looked closer, he saw Lorenzo, blood pouring from his arm. This strange cult of owls were no healers. With the final cultist defeated, the Elder drew something from his cloak. Lorenzo's arm. He swallowed it whole. Arlo soon wished that had been the worst of it. Was dead, and Arlo woke Lorenzo, who was as afraid as he was pained. Arlo sent the scared badger home where his brother was waiting to help him. From afar, the villagers seemed lifeless, lost in battle or to the cold. But up close, the truth was revealed. They were training dummies. It was a trap. The assassin was vicious, but Frog and Rat held their ground. Injured, the attacker fled, but Short Tongue was not about to let him escape. The pair found him licking his wounds at a makeshift camp. The assassin seemed to forget his pain as he took up his weapon. The assassin defeated, Arlo breathed a squeak of relief. But Short Tongue was not done. He needed to know who had sent them. The warlord sat surrounded by enslaved frogs. and laughed at the pair's demands for their freedom. He had a surprise for his guests. The stench of the dungeon hit them as hard as its floor, a floor that started to shake, and from the shadows emerged the largest toad core that Arlo had ever seen. And frogs slayed the beast, its bloated corpse sinking slowly into the mud. Arlo felt a pang of regret. It had been a slave as much as the others. Tyranny had ended. Short Tongue offered the frogs a home at Bogmire Forge. Together, he and Arlo had freed the rift as well as the frogs. Perhaps this would be an era of peace for both. It was eerily quiet at the ruins. Tuck had everything ready for the trap. It only needed Arlo to toss the blood fruit into the cooking pot. The stench would be sure to attract the beast. They only needed to wait. A high-pitched shriek pierced through Arlo's dreams, and soon the flapping of wings was upon them. Tuck asked if Arlo could carve its beak from the beast's remains, the perfect centerpiece for his new shop. Sheepbug's pungent scent makes them easy to track. The few that were left were terrified. Arlo had no sooner realized who the culprit must be, and it was upon him, a mudworm of the deep. The mudworm turned and sped away, but Arlo followed. Perhaps it would lead him to the cow grub. The cow grub moved, lying helpless at the center of the nest. Arlo would have to deal with the mudworm first. The prize cow grub was still alive and mooed gratefully at Arlo. It was almost as happy to see him as the elder would be at its return. raised his war horn. His unearthly screech seemed to stir the very air into fury. This was not the wind, but the beating of leathery wings. The camp leader was defeated, but they had to warn the rabbits. Darkwings were on their way. Kazak had sent one of his strongest generals, Necromancer Guraz. His defeat would rob the bats of a great weapon. Was safe in Rabbit Paws once more. Gray Ears swore that if the Warden of the Wastes ever called for help, the rabbits would answer. The burial chamber revealed both tales were true. A treasure hoard, and guarding it was the ancient Draugr Harrot Bluefang. Fearsome warrior, now laid to rest. More importantly, Arlo had found his treasure. Was no match for Arlo's superior skill. Reggie could already see this would be a tournament that they would squeak of through the ages. was a veteran too, used to fighting monsters and darkwings with ice under paw. Denis did not compare. Now the crowd cheered for him. In stature and skill, there was not a whisker between them. They shook paws in truce. No rat could doubt Arlo's worth now. Inside the castle, they found themselves in the chef's store. Before they could be disgusted at the contents, they had to take care of the chef. They moved in step, a flawless dance of blood and vengeance. Neither knew that their own blood united them, but perhaps, just then, they felt it. Arlo found Rita battling the Darkwing Smith, but the Smith's mighty hammer soon overpowered her. Together, Arlo and Erica fought the Darkwing Smith. The fiery heat at the heart of the mountain burned hotter than any forge. They entered the huge throne room. They finally set eyes on the foul, laughing figure of Count Kazak, sat on his icy throne. Myrtle kneeled exhausted before him. This pained the warden more than he could explain. Kazak left his beast to fight them. He had a king to kill. Arlo and Robin fought with all they had, their hope driving them on. The beast fell, but there was no time to rest. Leaving Robin to tend to Bertle, Arlo headed to the summit to find Reggie. The icy wind bit at his fur as he emerged on the peak. He saw, silhouetted in the mist, Count Kazak, and in his claws he held King Reggie, dangling over the edge. With a shriek of victory, the Count let go of the king and seemed to melt into the fatal mist. They flew into battle. The Warden and the Count's weapons clashed, echoing across the mountain. Corrupted body fell heavy on the ground. Arlo rushed to the edge, calling for the king, but the only answer in the mist was the icy wind. The war was won, but Arlo could not feel the victory. He barely noticed his friends join him. The Fellowship bowed their heads in honor of their brave king. The tale of this war would be as much of loss as of winning. Arlo heard a commotion ahead. In the throne room were raised voices. Bertle stood in front of Reggie's throne, holding the crown, asking who should now carry this burden. Denis barged forward to claim it. He was brother of the king. It was his by birth. Robin stepped forward and proclaimed that Arlo was rightfully king. Without him, there would be no kingdom to rule. He had proved himself on the peak. He was not alone. Leaders of the clans stepped forward and echoed their favor of the Warden. Arlo objected. He had no claim here. Bertle slammed his staff into the floor to silence the rising voices. He had a secret to tell. Arlo's father was King Rattus. Bertle himself had delivered him as a child to the Warden. He had a claim, if he was willing to take it. Arlo felt the truth of it, and the paw of destiny seemed to push him forward to take his place upon the throne. Bertle placed the crown upon his head. The weight of rule was his now. Denis had been forgotten in the shouts of joy from the clans. He raised his blade and swore vengeance. It was his birthright, and he would reclaim it from this usurper. Arlo set aside the Warden and became the king. A new dawn broke over the land, bright and clear. The king sensed it would not last. The promise of his half-brother would surely mean war would come again. But that, as they say, is a tale for another time.